Thank you for having me here. It's my first time in Saskatoon, but judging by both the quality of people that are here, but also the sheer numbers, you guys are absolutely headed in the right direction. I thought what would be interesting is to talk a little bit about my story and some of the experiences that I've been able to have and how I hope they apply or are applicable to you. Maybe there's some similarities in my story, or at least the genesis of it, that can resonate, and we can share that either after I'm done speaking or maybe after the event is over. As was said, I met the president. He was then Senator Obama in 2006. I graduated from college in 5 years. It's not a race for folks in school right now. Enjoy the victory lap. You don't get something for finishing in 4 years that you don't in 5 years, so just enjoy yourself. But I know. Yeah. None of the parents are clapping if you're here with them. But I had a degree in biology, a minor in chemistry, and a minor in history, and I never, ever volunteered on a political campaign. I graduated and was really lost as to what I was going to do next. I had a biology degree. I took organic chemistry, which taught me that med school was not in my immediate future, and realized, I had to figure this out. I was lucky enough to have a senator. One of my best friends growing up, his dad became a U.S. senator, or was elected to the Senate, and so they needed official staff on their Senate, on the Senate office. And so I became an outreach assistant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is where I'm from, and basically drove around for a year and a half talking to senior senators, to Kiwanis clubs about how great Senator Tim Johnson is. They had an opening in the D.C. office. I said, you know what, that sounds great. I'm going to go out to Washington, D.C. It was during the recount in 2000. And so my first real exposure to that, I went out and saw that there were 10,000 people protesting outside the Supreme Court. The very first tour of the U.S. Capitol I had was literally the door opened up and there were it seemed like 5,000 cameras, but they had just a bank of cameras, and they're clicking flashes just happening right when the door opened. I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, oh yeah, it's Mitch. I just got here from South Dakota. This is. And Al Gore walked by with Tom Daschle and all these other leaders. They just had a big press conference right outside, and so I told my parents to look in Time magazine. You're going to see me like in the corner of an elevator, sort of waving. I said, my God, what a unique experience! What an awesome experience! And then 9/11 happened, and I was in the Hart Building, the U.S. Capitol, and we all came running out after we saw what happened to the Pentagon and to the World Trade Center. And shortly after that, there was an anthrax attack, for folks who may remember that. And so the entire Hart Building, which is where most of the senators have their offices, was shut down for about 6 months. And so as we're getting closer to 2002, I said, well, there's a lot of great things about South Dakota, and I'm starting to appreciate them more and more. Maybe it's time to go home and help Tim on his first re-election. So this is in 2002. It's the very first campaign I've ever worked. And at this point, I wouldn't say I was an organizer. In fact, I know I wasn't. I was a, meddling political operative, trying to get, more than anything else, a family friend's job back. In fact, we're from the same hometown, and so when I come back and I'd start organizing or talking to volunteers or supporters, I delivered their papers as a kid. It's a very small town of about 10,000 people. And so I'd go to them and I'd say, can Tim Johnson count on your vote? And they're like, well, I don't know for sure. I don't know. I said, listen, this election is about jobs. And they thought I was going to go into some big macroeconomic argument. I said, it's about my job. So unless you want me moving back with my mom and dad, vote for Tim. And they're like, oh, got the same kind of chuckle. I think 9 times out of 10 it probably worked. But we ended up winning by 524 votes. It was the closest election in the country that year. George W. Bush came to South Dakota 5 times. In a state that he had won by 21 or 22 points in 2000, and it was one of the few Democrats to actually win in 2002. And I said, my goodness, look what I was able to do, right? And I'm not saying that from a place of, like, at this point, I was still a very poor organizer. But 524 votes, I worked 110-hour weeks for 9 months. I could take credit for that. And so could everybody else on the campaign. So could the volunteers who were also dedicating their time. So all of a sudden, I started saying, my goodness, I could see the power of one individual having a profound impact. There's one person who took 5 years to get through school. Because of that person's hard work, I was just able to, thumb my nose to the President of the United States. Pretty cool, right? So afterwards, even though I was pretty burned out, I said, this isn't bad. And so I continued on campaigns. Did a race down in Louisiana in 2003 where I called Britney Spears because she was on my database. She's not a Democrat. Went to Iowa and worked my first presidential Iowa caucus. Was there for about 10 months. 2004, then I moved back to South Dakota and worked for Tom Daschle. And we lost. We lost everything in 2004. But this one was very, very personal. And I've learned more from that loss than I have from any of the successes I've had. And I say that without equivocation. It was the most powerful learning experience of my life, something I still think about all the time. And so shortly after 2004, I said, you know what, I'm sort of done. Went to Washington, D.C., had a normal environmental job working for, it was called the Environmental Defense Fund. I was their national field director, working way less, making way more money, being healthier. And I kind of got bored. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go to Minnesota, which if you're from South Dakota, if you live in Minneapolis, that's basically like anyone else in the States living in Manhattan. It's like you've made it if you live in Minneapolis. And so I told my parents, listen, I'm moving back to Minneapolis. And they're like, oh, that's great, honey. We can't wait to tell all your friends. Washington, D.C. is like a foreign land, but Minneapolis, you're like, hey, I've done it. And so I moved there, and just like probably many of you, not all of you, I imagine, but many of you, in 2004, I watched that speech. I read The Audacity of Hope. And so at that point in 2006, Senator Obama was traveling all over the country, doing fundraisers for Senate candidates, for gubernatorial candidates, for congressional candidates, doing a bit of a book tour at the same time. And I was a coordinated campaign director in Minnesota. And because of some of the people that worked for Tom Daschle, now work for Senator Obama, they asked me if I would staff him. Yes, I would. What a great treat. And so there was what they call the Humphrey Day Dinner, which is the big statewide Democratic Party fundraiser. And he was going to come in, and he was the keynote. And so it was at the Grand Hyatt in Minneapolis. It's about a 40-story hotel. It's huge. And he was staying at the top floor. And so I remember how excited I was, how nervous I was. I had all these little conversation nuggets in my head ready to go if he looked at me and was ready to talk. And so I got there and took the elevator all the way up, listened to that horrible music. Got there, we waited 15 minutes, his person came out, shook my hand, we had small talk for a little bit, and then the senator came out. And I was starstruck just like a lot of folks were, or are, if you have a chance to meet him. And so we're in this elevator, and it's just, it's barely moving, and it's 40 floors, and it's having that horrible music, and I'm trying to be cool, sort of occasionally glancing up and then seeing that he wasn't looking at me and, sort of looking back around again. And then he goes, Mitch. That's my President Obama impression. And then, I snapped to it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He goes, do you happen to notice what I'm wearing? And I hadn't. And so I looked. I'm like, well, now that you mention it, sir, yes. He's like, I had to get up at 4 in the morning. I had to dress in the dark so I wouldn't wake up Michelle. And I put on black pants and a blue top. And so here was my moment. I, earlier, didn't have clean socks. And so the only clean socks I had didn't match. And so I was wearing mismatched socks. And so I said, sir. And I started going. And we're on floor 28 at this point, so we're not even halfway down. And he kind of pauses and quizzically looks at me a little bit and goes, but are you going to be speaking in front of 3,000 people? No, sir, I'm not. And then I didn't say anything for the rest of the night, as we're slowly going down. And the makeup of the Democratic Party are the liberal activists, and that's a little L. I understand that there's a distinction here. The progressive activists in Minnesota are generally, it's a very white state, very white. And the progressives there are overwhelmingly white. And so seeing their reaction to then Senator Obama come in, it was unbelievable. It took them 45 minutes basically to get from the entryway of the theater here to where I am right now. Everybody wanted him to sign everything. Sign this pamphlet, take a picture with me. He couldn't move. He finally got up and he gave that famous kind of stump speech that he gave in 2004. Talked a little bit about the fact that nobody knew who he was. He talked about his community organizing days. Talked about how, they'd try to say his name and they'd say, hey, Alabama, yo mama, And we get into the fact that there's a lot more that unites us as a country than divides us. There's a lot of skepticism in politics. And for me at that point, I had been around the block enough to say, well, is this a person who is speaking from their heart, or is this a politician giving a line that the audience wants to hear? And so when he finished speaking, I raced up again to be a dutiful staffer and hopefully redeem myself. And he had people in tears. So this entire audience, 3,000 people, stand up, they're clapping, tears are streaming, people hugging each other. I expect the same reaction when I'm finished here. And so this is now probably 9:30 or 10 at night. He's coming off the stage, I'm right there, and he goes, Mitch. And again, I'm okay, all right, I'm ready, I'm gonna play it straight this time, I'm not gonna try to relate. He goes, is there another way for me to get out of this room? And I looked what he was looking at, and he would not have gotten out of the room in under an hour. And he was exhausted, he'd been up since 4 that morning. And the other side of the story is, there's actually a relatively, it's small in the single digits, but there is a healthy population of African immigrants in Minnesota. And so a security guard came up and goes, sir, I can get you out through the kitchen. He looked at me, and I went. He looked at the 3,000 people, he looked back at the security cop or guard and goes, let's go. And so now we're hightailing it out, and we're going through the bowels of this gigantic hotel. And generally the people that work in the bowels of a gigantic hotel are the folks who are left behind, folks who are forgotten, their voice isn't heard. And so the people who cook the food, who serve the food, who wash the linens, lined up in this dark and dirty hallway and clapped as he walked out. Most of those folks were people of color. And so as we're walking out, I go, my goodness. He's talking about this message that unifies people as opposed to tearing people apart, and seeing the reaction he had to a room of, frankly, rich white people, and the same reaction that he's getting from people that, probably have never voted before. Said, this person's on. And so I called everybody I knew. I said, listen, if he decides to do this, I'm in. I don't know what my role will be. I don't know what you'll ask me to do, but I'm in. And so in January of 2007, I moved to Iowa, and I was his caucus director. And even though he was able to get those sort of reactions from people, the hard work of building a movement started in living rooms. Now again, my personal story here is, I'm still the guy who took 5 years to graduate from college. I've had a couple successes. I've recognized the power that one individual can have, but in my mind, there are limitations to what I could do, right? And maybe you think that way too. And so I think what a lot of us do when you start a journey is you just put one foot in front of another. And so I was in Iowa. I was there for 11 months. And when we first got there, there was a lot of fanfare about him, but it died down pretty quickly. In fact, for 8 of those 11 months, we were either in 3rd or 4th place. People nationally were giving up on us. It was just the folks that we had organized in Iowa who believed. And it was folks, frankly like me, but also a lot of younger organizers, and more importantly, the volunteers that they had built a relationship with. And so all of a sudden now you see the power of these relationships really being tested, but holding. Getting then Senator Obama elected was important to them, but what was probably more important was not letting their fellow volunteer or their fellow organizer down. The commitment was that strong. That's the bond, that relationship building, that intentional relationship building provided. And frankly, it was a fabric that sustained us during the low times. And so then we won Iowa. And I remember afterwards, he ended up winning by like 9 points. So at this point, I can't pat myself on the back. This isn't 524 votes. But, I'm still feeling like, hey, I did something here, right? And I remember I called my parents. They're like, well, honey, how come you're not crying? I go, I said, I still think we have a long ways to go. And as you remember, that primary was brutal. Won Iowa, lost New Hampshire. Split decision, although we really lost Nevada. We then had February 5th, that first Super Tuesday, which was a draw. I was back in Minneapolis, back in the seat of power as far as my parents were concerned. We did well there. We did well in North Dakota. We did well in Kansas, the other 3 states I managed. And then I went down to Texas. We lost Texas. And then I went to Indiana. And at that point, I'm getting pretty tired. It's been 18 months. And by any stretch, if you had said to me at that point in my life, when I was in college, look what you've accomplished, it's okay to be tired, you probably can step out now. But I didn't. I didn't because of the relationship I had, not with the senator, although I did have a good relationship with him. It was because of the staff and the friends I had built along the way. And so, just like you do on any long and great journey, you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. I got shingles in Iowa. I was 31 years old and healthy. I was skinnier than I am now. I was running and I thought, I think I have spider bites on my back. Nope, you have shingles. So, it was a stressful time. It was a stressful time. Wear you down. And we finally got through Indiana. And, the big picture things at this point were just too far out. We're going to provide health care to millions and millions of people. No. I just got to get more votes. Or we're going to, hopefully help save the economy. We're going to end don't ask, don't tell. Do all of these generational transformational things. No, that's not what we're going to do. All I'm going to do is put one foot in front of another and keep building relationships with the people I work with, understanding what our goals are, and keep plugging away. And so we got through the primary. He got the nomination. And I got to go to Virginia. And I was a state director in Virginia, which had not voted for a Democratic president in 44 years. But slowly but surely had been trending a little purple. There have been a couple Democratic wins along the way, and so people started thinking, well, Virginia's a place that will likely, if there's going to be a unusual win, it's probably Virginia, or it could be Virginia. I said, what a great challenge. There are some other unique aspects of Virginia in American history. It was the home of the Confederacy. It was the birthplace of slavery. And I thought to myself at the time, that is, to be able to be a part of a team that can help fix that, or at least change that, not fix it, but change it, it's too much. It's going to keep putting one foot in front of another, continue building relationships with my staff and my other organizers so that they can encourage and build relationships with volunteers, and those volunteers can build relationships with voters. That's what I know how to do. And so it was about 6 months. It was a 6-month campaign, and for a while we were losing. It wasn't until, sort of the great economic downturn that people started to rally towards this message of change finally. And so we won. My parents called me that night, and they're like, well, why aren't you crying? And I said, well, I don't know. I kind of feel like the journey's not over yet. And so that night, and you may remember this, in 2008, the very last speech he gave was at a Civil War battlefield site. 90,000 people came out the night before the election, where there was a bloody Civil War battle, to hear the first African American president speak. And so that next day, we got through the election. That Wednesday then, I went back to our office in Richmond, and people just came in, older African Americans, 80, 90 years old, could barely walk or walk very slowly, and just start crying and hug staff, hug 22-year-old white kids from South Dakota or Iowa or New York or Massachusetts, people they had never known before, and just say thank you. And so if all I had ever accomplished was being able to be a part of that moment, you know, life would have been a success. But there was more to do. And so the theory of change for me is the journey's never over. And so from that moment, we started working on the Affordable Care Act. It took a year to pass. It was twice as long as the general election in 2008. And now you're starting to see finally, after a couple websites were fixed, millions and millions of people now have health care in the United States that didn't before. And that number's only going to grow. Obamacare is going to be a success. You're seeing millions of GLBT Americans no longer discriminated as much as they once were. There's still a lot of work to be done there, and the president will say as much. But big, big strides have been made because of this president. You look at the work that was done fixing our economy, you know, fixing the auto industry, huge, huge transformational things that this president was able to do. And because of my small role in it, I can take a little bit of credit for that too. We all can. That's why we do this. I'm not being selfish or egotistical. I'm just saying my work, the work I've done there, allows me to take a little bit of credit for that. And if you work in an empowering organization, you hope everyone involved in it walks away feeling like that. I owned a little bit of this success. Not all of it, but a little bit. And so, you know, I'm so happy and honored to be here, not only to share my story with you and the experiences that I've had, but to learn from you. I think many of you are here, and some of the stories I heard prior to me coming up here inspire me, you know, to know that my journey is still not done. I still have more things to do. I can still impart some wisdom or experiences that I've had that hopefully will have a positive impact for others down the road. And I think that's why we're all here. And so, you know, what I would ask of all of you is that you do have a responsibility to do more. If you didn't accept that responsibility, you wouldn't have come here tonight. There's a lot of things you could do on a Friday night. But you came here. And so you need to follow through on your journey. And so thank you so much for allowing me to be here this evening, and I look forward to talking with you all very soon. Thanks.